You are walking with your group through country none of you have crossed before, following a herd that wandered beyond every path you knew. There is nothing written down anywhere on Earth that tells you how to get home. Then the weather turns. Rain flattens the tracks you were following. Fog swallows the hills you were using to judge direction. The sun disappears behind cloud, and daylight is running out faster than your food. Every landmark that told you where you were seems to vanish at once, and there are people behind you counting on you to get them back before dark. No map exists to unfold, so what do you actually use? Part of the answer is already inside your skull. In 1971, neuroscientist John O'Keefe discovered neurons in the hippocampus that fire according to where an animal is in space. Decades later, researchers identified grid cells nearby, neurons that fire in repeating patterns as an animal moves through an environment. Together, these systems form part of the brain's machinery for representing space. The discoveries earned the 2014 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine. Humans carry comparable navigation machinery. Long before anyone could draw a chart, the brain was already capable of building and updating an internal representation of where the body was in relation to the world around it. But an internal map is only as useful as the information fed into it. And that is where skill begins to matter. Watch an expert sand tracker in the Kalahari examine disturbed sand, and you can see how much information a trained observer can extract from terrain. Tracks can reveal which animal passed through. Their depth and spacing can suggest speed. Changes in gait can reveal an injury. Freshness can sometimes be estimated from how sharply the print survives, how wind has disturbed it, or what has happened around it since it was made. This is not a direct window into the Paleolithic. Modern tracking traditions developed in their own histories and environments. But they demonstrate something important. A human observer can learn to extract an extraordinary amount of navigational information from ground, vegetation, water, slope, wind, and animal movement without ever consulting a written map. Prehistoric foragers may have depended on similar kinds of landscape reading. Individual skill only carries a person so far, though. Knowing one valley is useful. Knowing how that valley connects to rivers, hunting grounds, seasonal resources, neighboring groups, and distant routes is something much larger. Anthropologist Ariane Burke has proposed that expanding social networks in the Paleolithic may have placed increasing demands on spatial cognition. Small groups did not exist in complete isolation. Maintaining contact with other people could mean knowing where distant groups were likely to be, how to reach them, where resources existed between territories, and which routes remained usable at different times of year. Under that model, navigation was not simply about finding your own way home. It also helped maintain connections across landscapes far larger than any single camp. And eventually, human navigation had to scale to something almost unimaginable. By roughly 50 to 65,000 years ago, humans had reached Sahul, the ancient landmass that later became Australia and New Guinea. Getting there required crossing open water. At some points, there was no coastline to follow all the way across. We do not know exactly how those crossings were navigated. People may have read ocean swell. They may have watched clouds forming over distant land. They may have followed birds moving between feeding and roosting areas. They may have used combinations of cues we can no longer reconstruct. What matters is that successful settlement happened. Enough people reached Sahul for populations to persist. That is difficult to explain as a single accidental drift across open water. Some form of planning, orientation, and shared geographic knowledge had to be involved. Landmark memory alone is not enough for a crossing like that. You need some working model of a world extending beyond what you can see. That kind of geographic knowledge does not have to exist on paper. Modern Aboriginal Australian traditions show what can happen when routes are stored socially instead. Songlines can connect journeys to sequences of real places. A waterhole. A rock formation. A bend in a dry riverbed. A mountain. A story or song can preserve the order of those features, so that a route exists in memory rather than ink. In some traditions, celestial knowledge is also woven into navigation and storytelling, allowing features of the night sky to reinforce information about movement across country. We should not project any one modern tradition unchanged tens of thousands of years into the past. Cultures change, routes change, stories change, but these traditions demonstrate something important. Complex geographic knowledge does not require writing. A map can exist as memory distributed across people, stories, landmarks, and repeated journeys. And that brings the story back to us. We tend to imagine that this kind of navigation belongs to a more primitive past, something technology replaced because our brains became less dependent on it. But the navigation circuitry is still here. Modern experiments have shown that when people actively navigate through an environment, areas including the hippocampus respond to the spatial decisions they are making. When turn-by-turn navigation makes those decisions for them, some of that activity is reduced. Other studies have found associations between heavier habitual GPS use and poorer performance on certain spatial memory tasks. That does not mean GPS is destroying the brain. And it does not mean everyone who uses navigation apps is losing the ability to find their way. It means something simpler. When a device makes every navigational decision for us, the brain has less reason to perform some of that work itself. Early humans were using essentially the same biological navigation machinery we still carry. The difference was how much survival demanded from it. So go back to that group in the storm. The tracks are gone, the sun is hidden, the hills have disappeared into fog. What gets them home is not one magical prehistoric trick. It is several systems working together. A brain continuously updating position, a lifetime of reading terrain, memory of rivers, slopes, vegetation, and animal movement, knowledge shared between people who had walked different parts of the landscape. And in some societies, routes preserved through stories and songs so that geographic knowledge could outlive any single person who learned it. Early humans did not need a map they could unfold. They carried geography in memory. They rebuilt it from the world around them, and they shared it with other people. The first map humans carried was not made of paper. It was made of memory.